Thank you. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting, the ETUC COVID-19 Committee. Tonight, the 16th of March 2021, we'll hear about how schools in Edinburgh are working, the changes that school staff have had to navigate over the last few months, and health and safety issues that school staff are having to work with. Now, just say it's wonderful to see so many of my colleagues here tonight, and I look forward to your contributions throughout the meeting. All our speakers tonight are members of the Edinburgh EIS Local Executive Committee, and will speak to you from a union perspective. Our first speaker will be Wendy Whyte. She'll be speaking about special education, and then she'll share some information, and then I'll come in, share some more information on my experience in working in primary schools, and then we'll hear from Craig McDonald, who'll speak from the secondary school perspective. Now, our EIS branch secretary, Alison Murphy, is here and will help us to understand what it's like to work closely with our employer, and will explain our ongoing dispute and her knowledge from across the city, from all the different perspectives. So welcome to you all. We'll hear from each speaker with an opportunity for questions, and then we'll open up the discussion part at the end. After Craig has spoken, I'll invite comments and questions, if that's okay. So to begin, I'd like to welcome Wendy Whyte. She's a teacher with 19 years experience working in special education. Wendy works with children with complex difficulties, and it is a great pleasure to hear about this part of Scotland's education system. So welcome, Wendy.
Hi, thank you, Claire. Thank you for that. 19 years, can't believe it's crept up on me. First of all, I'd like to just give you a bit of a background, an idea of what the context of our school is like. So we have 50 pupils, all primary school age. They all have a learning disability with autism, spectrum disorder and associated conditions. We also have 30 members of staff. That's quite a high ratio. So we split that up into, we have 6 classes, we have a teacher in each class, and then we have 3 members of support staff. Some people are fortunate enough to still have a nursery nurse. We've seen the demise of the nursery nurse, and this has been a great blow to special education. But we're fortunate to have some extremely talented members of support staff that do that job for us. So we went into lockdown obviously last year, and then we came back in August, and then we went back into lockdown. The second stage of lockdown, we went to sort of between a 50 and 70% model of attendance. And our head teacher was able to create bubbles. Now we've been in La La Land. It has just been quite an amazing process. We've created bubbles. So my team is a bubble. So me and my other 3 colleagues, we are in a bubble. We don't wear masks in our classrooms because the children need to see our faces, because they are at the very earliest stages of communication. We are a CERT school, which is a new programme that we've been rolling out for a couple of years now with extremely good success. We have much happier children as a result of this. You can ask me, I can talk about that for a long time. But in order for that to actually work properly with the CERTS model, we have to have lower numbers, and this is what we experienced during our 50%, 75% model. It was joyous, that's all I can say. We managed to reach out and sustain things like we employ intensive interactive processes. So you need a lot of facial contact, you need a lot of sensory work, you need quiet. So with 8 children who are all one-to-ones, some of them have what we call hyperacusis, they're very sensitive to sound, but there are other children that get dysregulated, and it can be a knock-on effect, which can be stressful for everybody. But during the lockdown times, we didn't experience that. As I say, lots of wonderful things happened. But also some of the mitigations our head teacher put in place were things we've been asking the council to do with regards to our playgrounds. So we split all our playgrounds so that each class had its own bit of the playground, thus keeping those bubbles maintained. Staff had staggered breaks. We created another staff room so that we could allow for social distancing. And in the corridors and communal areas, everybody was required to wear a mask and to be socially distanced. This has worked, and so far so good. Anyone who has had COVID, we had one member of staff, she got it from somewhere else, and it was at the weekend, so we've not had to go into any situations of containment and quarantine. My head teacher has the red file on her desk that we all know about. If the situation were to be that senior leadership team were all off, then we would have to go through a certain amount of protocols, and this was made clear. So communication's been great. We've been supported by the council, who have fixed the things and put up fences, and listened to our rather lengthy lists of what we can and cannot have in a playground. So it's worked out very well. But my main point, the main thing I want to say here is that the silver lining of COVID is class sizes must be reduced. 6, I have 8, even if I had 6 children with 4 or 5 with 3 members of staff, we would actually get something productive done. And we'd have happier children, happier families. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a complete disaster, but this, after my 19 years, was just absolutely wonderful. So the things that I had dreamt about. I think that's all I want to say, really.
Thank you very much, Wendy, for sharing your perspective. And absolutely happier children is what we all want to hear.
Yes.
Wonder if anybody would like to come in with a comment or a question at this point. Do you raise your hand and indicate to me if you would like to come in? Couldn't see anybody, so I think, Wendy, you were very clear what you were saying. Everybody understood what you were talking. Oh, I see somebody in the camera. I see Helen waving at me. Helen, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I don't know how to put a hand up on Zoom. I don't see a little symbol for a hand. I'm quite surprised that you don't have classes of 6 being as they're learning.
Yeah. No, we even have a class of 10. And this has been a constant thing that we've been saying, and especially with the advent of inclusion, and children that we used to have are now mainstream, and then we have now got more children with more complex needs. Absolutely. And a lot of resources have been taken away from us, such as NHS support from occupational therapy, speech therapy, these things. I now feel that I'm pretty well trained up. I have to problem solve so many things.
Yeah. I think that's an issue. I think the class size, I'm sure that the national guidance includes autism as a communication barrier, and therefore it already says there should be 6.
Yeah. Well, this is, for some reason, it's not been adhered to.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that you should probably be asking your union to help you with. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it sounds that you've got great communication in your school. Do you think you could?
Do. We're a very happy school,
please.
Yeah.
There's work for you coming forward from Helen. Thanks very much for that, Helen. You might have noticed my Zoom crashed there, and I cannot see anybody's chat. So if I don't see anybody waving at me, I do. I see Ian. Thanks, Ian.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you had seen my hand up or not. Yeah, it's interesting, Wendy, that you were saying there that you've only had the one COVID case, and that the bubbles in your school seem to be working. I know that I've got a vested interest because both my wife and my sister-in-law are PSAs in special needs schools and have been for many years. And I suppose, I've had the worry of my sister-in-law was one of 14 cases at Kames. She's now been diagnosed with long COVID. And you know, there is no social distancing in special needs school, and these children do need that specialist looking after, and they have a rapport. So it's, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that after all the disasters that I've been hearing about schools and the numbers of COVID cases in mainstream and special, it's good to hear that there is a school that have had low numbers and where the bubbles are actually working. Thanks, Claire.
Is that you, Ian? Thank you. I'm
Yes,
having a couple of difficulties here. Wasn't sure if I had heard all of you. Okay, I'll move on if that's okay. Thank you. So I'm Claire. I'm a member of the Edinburgh EIS local executive. I've also been teaching a long time, coming up 29 years, mostly in Scotland, but also in England during the introduction of the literacy and numeracy hours. So I'm a sport for learning teacher in one of Edinburgh's most deprived areas, and I represent 25 teachers. So yesterday, after another 3 months out of school, primary 4 to 7 children returned to our buildings. And every school's health and safety committee had met yet again to ensure that the risk assessments were up to date and that protocols were in place and communicated to staff. If, like me, you were struggling to reach your pupils for months, you felt very grateful to be back in the building, because online teaching does not provide the opportunities that we really need to check for understanding and just to see how the pupils are physically and mentally, and just to be able to nurture them. However, some teachers have major concerns that they're not being told the truth about schools driving the numbers of positive cases of COVID-19. On television news articles, we hear the Deputy First Minister talk about how he's listened to detailed clinical analysis, assuring him it's safe that younger children are less likely to catch or pass on the virus than older children and adults. Well, that may or may not yet be proven, but what about the people who staff the schools? We've not had enough time to fully understand how schools will be affected by COVID-19 or long COVID in pupils and staff. Dr. Deepti Gurdasani from Queen Margaret University told us on Sunday at the launch of the Zero COVID Scotland meeting that schools being open does drive transmission. And from my own experience, I do believe her. Edinburgh Council has recorded over 100 schools which have been affected by COVID-19 since the beginning of the pandemic. And when there were 3 positive cases in staff in my school in the same week, we were told that it was community driven, not the school. So schools are now run very differently. Limited contact between classes, so we don't have any assembly, no indoor PE, no ICT suite, no library visit. We've got separate dining, break, toilet times, with pupils staying in their rooms as much as possible. It's not the way that we want to work at all, but we need to try and curb any outbreak and keep everybody in school as safe as possible. In primary schools, teachers, like Wendy were saying, we've been wearing face coverings in communal areas like the staff room and corridors, but as soon as we step into our classroom, we take our mask off. Once again, primary children need to be able to see your face. But clearly, this is leaving all school staff at risk. Our classrooms are really full. We've got many, many classes in my school with 30 to 33 pupils. And in those rooms, you've got the teacher, the PSA and the pupils. There's no space for physical distancing and the pupils just can't stay apart. We believe that children work best when they play together and collaborate. And isolating pupils has never been a mitigation. And teachers know that many of their pupils, they need that closeness, a hug, a high five, some sort of encouragement before they can settle to their work. And we in the primary school feel that it's an integral part of our role. To improve the ventilation in our classrooms, windows are open at the beginning of the day and regularly throughout the day to purge the air. Schools have been told that they can get a CO2 monitor if they want to request one from the city. I think it would have been more helpful for them to have been rolled out before the restart to help staff feel more valued from CEC. But as every school is a different age, a different layout, the guidance on ventilation is very unhelpful. It's often very scientific, which is difficult for us to apply to our own setting. And staff are constrained by temperature and outside conditions to whether they feel that their children can work comfortably in the classroom with the windows open. So for 3 weeks, teachers have been given the opportunity to use lateral flow device tests. So far in my school, we've only had a few void tests, but we have found test kits with one of the different parts missing, leaving the whole box of 7 kits unusable. Some of our teachers don't believe the accuracy of these tests, and they intended to continue to go for PCR tests. However, access to this through the ORB, the City of Edinburgh Council's online portal, has been stopped recently. In my school, we've had a major difference in the numbers of those participating with the lateral flow device tests, between the children and family staff and those from FM. So far, most of the teachers are volunteering at my school, about half the PSAs, and 1 member of FM staff has volunteered. Schools have worked really hard to get children to access online learning. Teachers have had to learn how to do their job completely differently and with significant barriers. The most significant in my situation is the lack of resources and the assumption that all families have access to iPads or personal computers for their children. Parents have explained to me that trying to even see some of their work on their phone screen, it was impossible. So as well as the lack of devices, no Wi-Fi in the house has meant that the poorest in our society have had to pay the most for data. If you had to choose between online learning and dinner, there really is little choice. On top of these access to technology issues is the fact that many of our parents were unable to support their children due to a lack of knowledge or understanding of what they were to do or how to actually access the work. So our teachers had to work really hard to support the pupils and their families at their level, which means that the teaching of new knowledge and practice of new skills has just not happened for many pupils, leading to massive gaps in learning. However, we are starting to see some pupils who have made progress online. As they're taking their time, they're looking back over little films or listening to recordings has really benefited them. So another part of my role is as assessment coordinator in the school. And in primary school, we assess the children at primary 1, 4 and 7 using a standardised assessment. Now, the assessments will go ahead this year between now and the end of the session, even though the pupils have had nowhere near the same level of input and teaching. And in my opinion, this seems very harsh, to judge them the same way as we always have when their experience has been so different. So my job involves supporting those children who require extra help in literacy, especially reading. Pre-COVID, I would have supported groups in about 6 classes a day. However, I'm only allowed to work in 2 bubbles or classes per day now. So there are many pupils missing out on extra support from a small group setting again that will help them to develop their skills. We do have a Closing the Gap teacher working in our school, but at Easter she moves on to another school within the cluster. This is clearly not nearly enough time to close the poverty-driven attainment gap for anyone, let alone the considerable number of pupils who need additional support in one of the most deprived areas of Edinburgh. The EIS is asking for supply teachers to be used to help reduce the numbers of pupils in the classes, but schools have limited budgets to be able to pay for them, leaving a proportion of our profession with no work. We don't yet know how the break has affected the children, but we're very worried that the missed opportunities, difficulties with transitions, and effects on mental health of pupils and some teachers are going to create additional challenges for us all. Finally, City of Edinburgh Council teachers have learned a raft of new skills and reached their pupils. We have turned learning and teaching on its head for our families. We appreciate the positives of outdoor learning and the use of ICT, but we now need our employer and the Scottish Government to recognise our work and to support us in extending these positives and eradicating the difficulties that COVID-19 has brought. So thank you, that's all I've got to say. I wonder if there's anybody that wants to come in with a question or a comment just now. Alison, I can see your hand going up.
I was just applauding you, dear. No questions.
Thank you.
I do, since I have taken the mic off, I will need to have a chat to you separately about the taking off the access to asymptomatic testing. I wasn't aware they'd done that, and I'm not sure that that's correct. So yeah, you and I maybe have a chat about that later.
Certainly.
I've got a question.
Oh, I think I saw a hand there. I see Des with his hands up. Yes, Des.
Yeah, I've got a question about, well, as you know, last year we did this study on child poverty in schools, and with the help of the EIS, interviewed a number of teachers. At that time, we worked out from the official statistics that there was about, this was in March 2020, there's about 23,000 children in Edinburgh who could be classified as living in poverty according to the standard definition of what living in poverty is. But we also predicted that, this is before COVID, that with the changes in universal credits and changes in the labour market, that child poverty was going to go up sharply. And when we had a deputation, as you know, to the City Council in February this year, I made the prediction in my statement that we could make that between now and sort of summer of 2022, I reckon that child poverty in Edinburgh would double from 23,000 to 46,000. And again, this is because of the impact of universal credit and then also rising unemployment in the city because of the economic disruption. I just wondered, from your experiences in primary school the last year, would you say that child poverty has remained the same or going up, or is there any change that you can detect?
Yes, I can absolutely detect that more of our families have been asking for food. You're aware that we have a food bank at our school. So yeah, we've had lots of people asking for food parcels and data packages. Something called MiFi boxes that provide data for families for up to a year, I think. So they've come in, I think they're from the Scottish Government, but we've had 60 families borrowed a device from us. 15 packages of these MiFi boxes, MiFi things, I'm not sure what they are, sorry. And just many people coming to school to pick up groceries, shopping. We've also given out vouchers for a supermarket, a discount supermarket that's opened up in our area. So yeah, I think it's staring us all in the face really that poverty is rising in the area that I work in. Alison, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that may become a particular problem with Edinburgh going forward, which will exacerbate something that's an issue from the Scottish Government, is the Scottish Government does give a reasonable amount of, well, it gives some, it's never enough, gives some extra funding to schools where it identifies as a large amounts of poverty. But that is based on really, really crude measures. So it's things like, you know, just straightforward records of sim decile where, you know, pupils living, or free school meal entitlements, things like that. It's not that those poor, but they are pretty crude. Edinburgh has then made so you've got that issue, and then on top of that, Edinburgh makes choices about how it allocates school budgets, which effectively reinforce that. And I mean, people have been raising this for a long time, because yes, you go to areas, parts of our city like Marchmont, clearly they are much wealthier than other parts of our city. But even within those areas, there are going to be individual people who are living in poverty. And those schools have ridiculously low amounts of money to actually try and support those pupils. I think one of the things that's clearly an impact of the pandemic is right across the city, people have lost jobs and lost income. And actually the poverty, we don't know for certain, but I would be surprised if we're not going to find that poverty actually becomes much more of a widespread phenomenon. And actually, I think a lot of our schools are really, really going to struggle now, because they have so little funding because of that mechanism. And also, even if maybe in a year, 2 years, parts of how that those funding decisions are made change, it's going to be far too slow. So I think we are going to see a real problem in schools, particularly because of that, a kind of an iniquity in how the money is assigned is going to get perpetuated and made worse. And I think that is, yeah, it's going to be a real problem for a lot of schools.
Thank you, Alison. Is there anybody else that wants to come in on that point? Did you see the comment in the chat from Marie saying that, yeah, she's waving at me. Marie, is it okay? Do you want to come in here and talk about what your son's seen on the trams?
Yeah, my oldest son is a tram driver, and he's had it, not so much now, but before he had families using the Wi-Fi, and that was basically so kids could do work, which is quite sad to hear. Also as well, I work in a special needs school. I also have worked with Helen Haynes, my wee partner in crime. I'm actually a nursery nurse. And I work in a special needs school, and I'm also the unison steward, which I know Ian Mullen very well. And in the aspect of in my workplace, what the head teacher has provided for all our staff is phenomenal. It is, what she has done is outstanding, and I can't fault her in any form. And she does follow the guidelines. We are all in bubbles, and at the very beginning of the pandemic, I worked with the vulnerable youngsters who needed to be in school. We were very lucky that our school was a hub area. So it was a school hub as well as a summer hub, and I've worked through it all. And personally, I don't want to say this out loud, but I've been kept healthy out through it all. It is very tricky with the lateral flows. I was speaking to a nurse in my workplace, and she was saying if you're tested COVID, if you use the lateral flow test, it may show up. So please be aware it's not worthwhile, because it may take 90 days before it gets out your system. So you could be testing and coming back positive. So just to make people aware of that. Whether that is just that one-off case or the few cases that they've heard, but it may be of interest to Ian if he's going to hear from Unison members. And I need to go and pick my son up in about 15 minutes, so I will be back.
Thanks very much for your contribution, Marie. I think we'll go on to my next colleague now, if that's all right with everyone. We've got Craig McDonald here. He's a secondary school English teacher. Craig's been teaching for 10 years in West Lothian and Edinburgh, and prior to that he worked in IT and journalism. He says that in his normal times he's an SQA marker for National 5 and higher. So welcome to you, Craig, and over to you.
Okay, yeah, I was looking at everyone with all the very well prepared talks and frantically scribbling down some notes, so hopefully this will be coherent. I put the SQA thing in the wee bio thing because when you speak to secondary teachers just now, that is their main obsession. Whenever I'm on calls and I hear about like primary colleagues, special school colleagues, and I totally get the worries about health. I don't think we're quite affected that way because our children don't want to hug us. That they'll stay as far away from us as they possibly can. And I think, like Marie was saying about her head teacher, our management team have been great about keeping the school safe. So I think at August, staff were concerned about their health. Now, people, you know, they can see we're 1/3 of pupils at a time. We've got good hygiene going on, good ventilation. So we're not as worried about that. It's the main thing just now is SQA and the marking. So the issue is, for those of you who don't have to deal with this stuff, despite what the SQA have said, they've not really reduced the content of the courses. For example, in, I think it's National 5 Maths, they're taking one question out of the exam paper, but they're not telling them which one. So the kids have still got to do the whole course, and the teachers still got to teach the whole course. So there's not really that much reduction in the content that the pupils have got to actually get to grips with. So that's an issue. Then we get to the time we've got to do the assessments. According to Edinburgh's timeline, we've got to get essentially our results in by the 11th of June. So giving ourselves a couple of weeks to, you know, do some marking. We've essentially got about 5 weeks after the holidays to get the kids up to speed and get some kind of assessment like arrangements put into place, which obviously is a bit of a tall order. And then we get to the issue of when do we mark them? So normally the kids would sit their exams like end of April, even May, and then teachers would be paid to mark them in their own time. That's not happening this year. Class teachers are just marking the papers, presumably in their own time, because there's no study leave being given, there's no time given for marking. So we'll be marking at home, and obviously we will, because we want to do right by our pupils. But that's going to put pressure on the teachers, on their stress levels, their mental well-being, all the rest of it. Which leads me on to John Swinney's generous offer to give us all £400, which I don't want to sound whiny, because I'm sure primary colleagues will like glower at me if it's, you know, because we're getting our £400. But for example, I figured it out. I'm getting just over £5 for every senior pupil who I get through the process. To mark all those papers, normally you'd be looking at an average of about like £6 per paper per pupil, and they'll be doing 3 papers. So John Swinney very generously is giving us £400, but for me, and I think I'm quite representative, they're getting the marking done at 1/3 of the price, which again sticks in people's throats a bit and doesn't really address the workload issues there. And I'm going to tick some things off so I don't rant about the same thing twice, because that would be a bad thing. Right, and coming off the back of this, it's also about the pressure on the pupils. In this like online period, whether at the start of the year, I think we've got to grips with it. I don't think we particularly like it. I mean, purely because it's much easier to engage with kids when you can actually look them in the eye and have a wee chat with them. Having said that, the kids I've been dealing with online have engaged. It's been good, but fewer than half my pupils have been turning up. Probably a third have been handing in all the work. And I get that. I get there's problems out there. I get that there's financial issues. There's lots of kids just can't handle that level of autonomy. That's not me being nippy. They just can't cope with it. They're not ready to cope with it yet. So they're all coming back into school now, and they're all at different stages, and that's fine. We're just coping with it. But what we're seeing with these kids is they're getting really stressed. I mean, normally over the course of the year, you'll get emails popping out from guidance colleagues saying, you know, this kid's struggling with such and such, that kid's struggling with something else. Yeah, twice, 3 times as many of these are coming out just now. A lot of kids are very stressed. And all the things we get in the news about, oh, they must catch up. I don't think that is helping. If you tell a kid they've fallen behind when they're struggling to keep up, they're just going to stress more, and it's a vicious circle. So I'm going to take that off. That's a bad thing. And I think possibly the kicker, the wee twist of the knife, is that no one I've spoken to in secondary thinks decisions have been made for the right reasons. We feel that the wrong reasons are being made at the last minute because of fear of bad publicity. We were supposed to be getting, for these 3 weeks, we're supposed to be getting our senior pupils in to help them get ready for exams. You know, that would have been useful. And then a week beforehand, suddenly we're told, no, you're getting them all in. So you've got the stress of quickly rejigging all your arrangements, and then realising that the more pupils you're trying to deal with, the less each pupil's going to get, which means it's less efficient. People get cross because they thought their kids were going back for, you know, proper education, and it's maybe a day a week for some pupils. And we understand why this has to be because of the mitigation in place, but again, it's always, if the kids in because it's the best thing for them educationally, crack on, do that. But just because you're scared of particular Facebook-based parents groups, that's not a good enough reason to do this to the pupils or to do it to staff. Do I have anything else I need to add on to that? Yeah, and just to point out that I'm speaking as a teacher, and this is what I'm dealing with just now. But last week I was in helping man the hub, and I was speaking to some of the pupil support assistants who have been in the whole time, and essentially they are the first to get called in to do stuff, and the last to get consulted on how it should be done. And whereas I'm quite safely shouting away from behind my mask at the front of my room, a bunch of masked kids, they're the ones who are having to like hunker down beside the kids who need support and get in up close and personal, so to speak. Yeah, and they're possibly not being looked out for as they should. I'm going to tick that off. Is there anything else I need to say? No, I think I could rant further, but I shan't. Oh no, I will. I'll end on a positive note, just to echo what Wendy was saying. Having had my classes in for 2 days now, a third of the size, it has been really nice, because kids who normally are a bit leery and a bit attention seeking and a bit disruptive, they're not as bad because they're getting more attention. And when they do, you know, poke their head a wee bit, it's much easier just to like calm things down in a nice, friendly way. And the kids who normally either wouldn't speak up or you wouldn't invite to speak because you know they're a wee bit shy, and why would you do that to a kid in front of 30 other pals? I'm feeling I can actually invite them to take part in discussions, and they're feeling they can respond. So it's a much nicer environment, and I think it's a better quality experience. Can we go down to classes of 10 in secondary? I suspect that's a tough argument to make, but I think it's showing us, the pupils and ourselves, that smaller class sizes do make a difference. I don't know the numbers, but definitely in terms of the experience for all concerned, it's a much more positive thing. Right, I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Craig. You've really highlighted some of the challenges that you're having in secondary schools, and yeah, we hear you when you say you're having to jump at the last minute to make changes. We've been there too. I can see lots of hands coming up now after your chat, so thanks very much for that. Let's bring Des, then Louise, then Brian, please.
Yeah, the question I had was about the impact of COVID on like secondary schools. One question is, Ian, has like home working worked for secondary schools? I think Claire talked about the impact on primary schools, but has it actually worked? And because it seems to me that, you know, I'm worried that, I'm not sorted out in my own mind whether schools should have been closed or not, but I just wonder, do you think that should have been closed for in high schools? And the other question I wanted to ask was about health impact of the closure and getting back to school. Do you think that it's all been handled correctly or properly, or do you think it could have been handled better? That's my two questions, really.
Okay. From my own experience and my own skill, speaking to like various other colleagues, I think in secondaries it's been handled practically well. I think the mitigations have been put in place. I think the main shortcoming, it's just the last minuteness, as I said, and also I think if you'd ask secondary teachers how much they'd bet on the higher exams going ahead, if you asked them in like August, we would all had a happy wee bet on the exams being cancelled. So there was no surprise when the exams were cancelled. But again, they didn't cancel them because they didn't want to say they were cancelling exams, because that would get them in trouble with the Scottish Daily Mail or whatever. And I think that's added to the pressure to the kids. So should the schools be open? If it's safe, yes, they should. But should they have realistic expectations of what we can actually do and what the kids can achieve? Yeah, we should, because otherwise we're just stressing them out, and that's no good for anyone. I don't know if that answers your question, but that'll be my take on it.
Okay, thanks. Louise, would you come in here now?
No, I was just clapping, sorry.
Sorry, Brian, were you clapping or would you like to say something?
A bit of both, really. I was I was clapping, but I wanted to reflect on something that Craig had said as well about pupil support assistants. I mean, sorry, Brian Robertson, Unite City of Edinburgh Council branch, and we do represent a lot of non-teaching staff right across the city. And what it really struck a chord with is what you said about the pupil support assistants, because they are right in the thick of it. And we've had this argument, and Alison will kind of vouch for this, that we've had this argument constantly with the council in terms of proper safety, for proper measures for pupil support assistants, particularly in secondary schools, who are sitting right up close with really vulnerable pupils. So I'm really glad to hear you empathise with that. Another point I would like to make is in terms of pupil support assistants again, that and it's not really a question, it's a point to make, that I find that a lot of them are actually right now they are struggling because they are trying to chase up some of the really vulnerable learners, and it's part of their job, isn't it? And I do feel that we maybe need to start to look at a newer model of education, because those pupil support assistants, I certainly find from what they tell me, is that they're right up close with people, even beyond COVID. they are getting to know the children in a way, in a more social sense than simply educational. They get to know about their families, they get to know who bullies them, and so on and so forth. And there's something there that we're maybe in general missing a trick with. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Alison, would you like to come in now?
Yeah, it's just following on from a few things that Craig was saying. I mean, I think one thing that's certainly true in the secondaries is, yes, I mean, speaking as a secondary teacher myself as well, one of the reasons I went into it was precisely because those are kids who've always believed in physical distancing. Yay. On the other hand, what we also have is the fact that secondary kids, particularly the older they get, the closer they get in transmissibility to having the same risks as adults, and particularly with the new variants. And we do have a lot of secondary schools in Edinburgh that are very, very, very crowded, very overcrowded. And at the moment, our working assumption is that on the 20th of April, it's a full return for all kids. And at that point, physical distancing in secondaries goes out the window. And so that is a real concern for a lot of staff. I absolutely think, I mean, everyone's kind of alluded to it in different ways about the smaller class sizes has been a real benefit. And one of the things I think, Des, you asked about, how has lockdown worked for kids? I mean, clearly, overall, kids need to be in school. They need that kind of contact with adults and with friends. But there is no doubt, and again, I think Claire alluded to it, there's an awful lot of kids for whom part of the aspects of remote learning and part of the aspects of this have actually been a benefit. It's that kind of flipped learning thing, that you've got kids who can, when they're doing things remotely, look at the video explanation, look at it 3 or 4 times, and then come back with questions. So certainly later I'll be talking a bit about it. I think there will be things that can benefit, but this idea of smaller class sizes, I mean, EIS has had a campaign for a while now, we can say 2020, maximum class size of 20 and teachers having a maximum contact time of 20 hours. This is, I think, reinforced for an awful lot of us about why both of those are so important, because it gives you a chance to actually get to know and work individually with more of your kids. I mean, there's one of the reasons people fork out an absolute fortune to send their kids to private schools, smaller class sizes. It's not the only one, but that is part of it. And you know, the rest of our kids, you know, all kids deserve that right to get known. And Brian's dead right about the PSAs often being the one, because they're the ones who will sit with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 kids. You know, as a secondary teacher, the times I got the chance to do that, could have counted them on the fingers of one hand. So yeah, I think that was all I would say at that point. Yeah.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, I think any class teacher that's got a big group, you know, feels the guilt every night when you go home and you think, did I actually speak to that person today? Not sure. I'll bring Louise in next. Now, Louise is another member of our EIS local executive, and she's a supply teacher, so she'll have a slightly different perspective for you to hear.
Yes, and I'm not just a supply teacher, I'm a supply teacher in a secondary special school. So, you know, it's been really a very challenging few days. I'm not sure really how to describe it. I mean, our children are so big. I mean, it's like, you know, so in the classroom that I'm in this week, we can only have 2 adults. So this is causing problems because we have PSAs, but I'm having to sort of constantly juggle, well, you can't be in the room with us because you've got 7 large teenagers, and there's just not enough room for us. Anyway, but that was actually why I wanted to speak. My point was coming back to what Brian said about PSAs, and I really worry about the PSAs. And in the school I'm in, there's lots of us that are in the EIS. We have meetings, we talk, we have a voice. PSA, I asked what the PSA that I'm working with at the moment, and she said there isn't a rep in the school. So she said she had been personally passing on her concerns to her union, but there's no joined up sort of approach. And I feel they just, not only are they underpaid and overworked, but they also don't have a voice. So, so that's really all I have to say.
Well, thank you for that, Louise. I see Alan's posted an article from Edinburgh Live in the chat, but Ian would like to come in just now, so we'll hear from Ian too.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, it's I'll just say in response to what Louise said there, I find that really quite annoying that people are finding that they haven't got a voice within the school, because I work closely with Brian and with Alison, and the one thing that we have tried to say right from the start is that there is a whole environment in the school. Apologies to teachers, but it's not only teachers, it's FM staff, it's support staff, it's everybody together, and they should all be treated the same. So there should be a voice on your health and safety working group for everybody, and that's supposed to be every single week. And we've been assured that that has been cascaded down to all staff. That was the first point. The second point, and it was something that you said, Claire, about the Zero COVID conference on Saturday. Dr. Deepty's presentation actually backed up everything that I have been saying for months and months, that what we really need, or what we needed, was a short, sharp, complete shutdown, get the vaccine out, get everything under control, and then we can go back to some kind of normality, because this year is going to continue to yo-yo, and there's no doubt about that in my mind. This is going to last until the end of the year, as far as in my own belief. And I find it really hard to believe, you know, people in Profit meeting last night, I described John Swinney as the Scottish version of Dominic Cummins, but at least Cummins had the decency to actually go, because he's made 2 mistakes, and they've both involved schools reopening early. And then yesterday, we get this unbelievable decision that's been taken by the Scottish Government, that they're going to reduce the 2 metre ruling for school transportation to 1 metre. So it's okay to discourage people from using public transport unless it's essential, but it's all right to cram our kids into school buses. And I'll tell you the reason why. Some colleagues on this call have already got these figures. The official figures for COVID positive cases, according to our corporate health and safety team, from March last year to March this year, is 560. So that's 560 throughout the council. If you take schools alone, from August last year to March this year, primary schools, 428 cases, 283 pupils and 146 staff. Secondary schools, 292 cases, 244 pupils, 48 staff. Special schools, 42 cases, 6 pupils and 36 staff. 121 schools have been affected with positive cases. The total figures, 762 positive cases of school staff. And yet our senior management team, they know the real figures, because they're getting them given to them every week and every month. And Unison, EIS and Unite have already asked for the same figures, and we have not had a response in 3 weeks. I have taken this to the Health and Safety Executive. I've explained the whole situation. Rather than going through the rigmarole of involving a toothless regulator, I have decided that I was going to try and deal with it with senior managers, but it's going to come to a head shortly where I will actually report it to the Health and Safety Exec. And, you know, if need be, there might have to be a press release as well, because as much as the Scottish Government and this council want to play down the fact that schools are safe. The fact of the matter is they're not.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. No, thanks very much for sharing that information. Now, Helen, I want to come to you, but Louisa just wants to clarify one thing first, if that's okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to give the impression that our PSAs have no voice in our school. We do have a health and safety committee, and at least I think one PSA is on that committee and does speak, and I think other PSAs pass on messages and stuff gets communicated, but they don't have a joint, because for whatever reason they have not given them, nobody in the schools made themselves a rep. Then they just don't have the power, I suppose, the joint, they're not joined up the way the teachers are to communicate among themselves. So, but we do have a PSA on the Health and Safety Committee. That is definitely, okay, is that clear? I'm clarified. Thanks.
Thanks, Louise. Okay, Helen, we'll come to you now, please, and then we'll go to Brian.
Finally. Yeah, I had a wee list of things that I wanted to mention. People may not know, I work at Kames School, so we have, like, right through from primary right through to secondary autistic learners. We're having issues with the secondary learners in particular. Social distancing does not exist. Our pupils do not wear masks. I have questions, I'm hearing other people having quite positive responses to the mitigations being in place. I'm really pleased to hear other people's are working, because for some aspects of them within our school, they pretty much are a paper exercise. There is a risk assessment that says this should not happen, and therefore we've done all we can. Other staff, they generally, we do have a unison rep in school, and other staff also come through me. I'm not going to rant about the vaccine, because there are people in this meeting who have heard me doing that before, often and at length. At the moment, we seem to be lending staff to another school, which seems to be that's very worrying in terms of maintaining any form of a bubble. Because not only are you breaking the bubbles within our school, we're not even maintaining the school bubble. So that's a big concern for us just now, and I'll try and catch up with Alison about that in the next couple of days. And also, though, I want to know, when they're comparing data, they keep standing up and saying that being a teacher or school staff is completely safe, and compared to other comparable people, it's fine. Who are they comparing us with? Because I really want to be compared with people who are working from home. Well, I think I've finished ranting for now, thanks.
Thank you, Helen. Brian, can I come to you now?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. It was just quickly on the point that was made about the pupil support representation. I see there's something in the chat function as well about the percentage of PSAs that are union members. I couldn't really tell you, to be honest. I don't know the number of PSAs in Edinburgh Council. I could tell you that there's probably about 60, 70 or 80 who are Unite members. I couldn't tell you how many are Unison members. I don't think the GMB have any. Ian might know the Unison numbers, but I don't know how many the total is in Edinburgh Council. But just to step a wee bit further into it, right? The joint trade unions in Edinburgh Council work really well together at the higher level, at the level of dealing with the senior management. We round on them extremely well, and I think we get a lot of really good work done. I can see Alison. Sorry, you can't see me for some reason. Zoom's not letting me in, not letting me show my kipper, but I see Alison smiling there. And we round on them frequently, right? But where we maybe need to develop a wee bit better is on the ground level, because our 60, 70 or whatever it is, PSAs are spread in Unite are spread right across the whole council, right across every school, and every school, well, probably not every school, but spread across lots of schools. So it's really difficult. It would be impossible for Unite. You know, we might have a school where there's 2 cleaners are Unite members, 6 catering staff are Unite members, the Jannies are Unite member, 2 PSAs and a clerical, right? It's actually really difficult for us to have a union rep in there. And this is where I'm talking about a better way of working jointly for the trade unions could be, for example, Louise, if that person that you're talking about was a Unite member, I would say, get my details to them and tell them to give me a call. That's the level of kind of input, the level of coordination that we probably lack a wee bit in the City Council in terms of the trade unions. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. If you want to drop your email in the chat there, I'm sure anybody would be willing to pass it on to people in their schools. So thanks for that. Alison, do you want to come in just now?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I've been kind of scribbling a few notes. I was very glad to hear Craig saying that he had, having heard, yes, Wendy and Claire being very eloquent and saying we were just winging it. I'm like, oh, thank God. But then he went and made a very good speech, and I'm thinking, oh God, it's going to be more. I suppose partly because I wasn't sure what other people would want to cover, and there's so many different aspects of this that I could talk about. So I just scribbled a few things. I think I'm going to start off with a few positives that things that I think have the potential to be positive going forward. Let's hope in the after times. One is certainly, let's say, reinvigorating a campaign for small classes. I think we've all seen that. 2, seeing how actually when it works, ICT can be a real benefit. And while we're clearly still in the early stages of this, there has been a real drive to get it better rolled out and more equitably well rolled out. And if that can be kept going, I think that's got potential. Linking onto what Brian was saying, well, we have really, it's been a fight to get health and safety committees in every school. I think it's a fight where there's been huge strides made. And there's been huge strides made, first of all, in the fact that they are there in schools. There's been huge strides made in that they are becoming far, far, far more active than they ever were. They're much better sites of genuine collegiate collective discussion, where there's often quite a, I get copied in quite a few from members of mine where there's a real ding dong, but actually at the end of it, there's a much better understanding of process. And there has been a real effort in, I don't know about the majority, and certainly a significant number of schools to make sure that actually, yes, it does include representation from not just teaching staff, because there is no doubt in schools that teaching staff can tend to dominate, but actually to include a voice for all our staff. And so maybe that is one of the ways going forward that we build on that. And I'm really hoping that that aspect of collective and collegiate work will go forward in all sorts of aspects. And I've certainly seen it in individual school branches where, we've got reps who are active now who never were. We've got reps who are sharing information for each other. Claire's not mentioned it, but we set up a primary WhatsApp rep group a while ago. Well, they decided themselves, they're trying off a little health and safety group, and that, entirely self-generated. And if we can keep that sort of thing going, that potentially is a positive to come out of this. Even little things like ventilation. Edinburgh, to give its due, has done a lot of good work on ventilation, even though there are gaps in that, like getting CO2 monitors. But, even simple things like windows getting unjammed that have been shut for years. However, what have we got problems with? What are some of the sort of bigger issues? We've already talked about, it's been, that so many decisions seem to be entirely politically motivated. I think huge numbers of teaching staff have felt massively demoralised, particularly by one particular group, which I almost am reluctant to even name them and give them publicity, but, who have absolutely taken this as an excuse to just stick the boot in. And actually who are, from what we can see, well, I'm sure some of the people who've signed up for this group are well-meaning. There is no doubt that some of them have an entirely right-wing political agenda. They have some really shadowy lobbying groups. Some of the stuff that you'll see is actually really deeply anti-Semitic, other sorts of things, you know, real conspiracy theory stuff. And yet, because they are well funded, because they seem to be able to sort of play the media game, they get huge amounts of publicity. And staff are left with feelings that actually they get to influence decisions, and representative groups like parent councils are completely bypassed. So I think a thing we need to look at going forward is actually almost a democratic deficit of how there is genuine consultation so that all groups are heard and all groups get a say, as opposed to us just being seen as a political football where every decision, every thing that a teacher does is criticised, is amplified by the media and has influence. I mean, even to 2 weeks, I'm still slightly horrified by this, when Nicola Sturgeon announced that they were going to allow secondary pupils back and the younger ones part-time, a quote which was put into the Edinburgh Evening News of a parent going, I do not want my child in 2 hours, for 2 hours a day, keeping 2 meters like they are, what was it, like they're vermin. And this was how the parent was describing that their child being treated as if they're vermin, because actually what we were trying to do is keep that child and the families and everyone else safe. And you have this problem of the media amplifying that kind of thing. So I think that is something that really is something we're going to have to address going forward. Another huge problem that we've got is actually the tensions between what the Scottish Government say they're going to do and then what they devolve down to councils. Because the Scottish Government will set these great overarching objectives, like they'll say, schools need to bring the pupils back, they must maintain 2 meter distancing, but it's up to them to do it safely. And then Edinburgh will try and do it safely. And then what happens? They get criticised because actually they can't get them all back enough. And so the councils are given huge amounts of responsibility, are given nothing like the resources and they expect that they need to be able to do it, and yet are blamed when anything goes wrong. So I think there's been a real abdication of responsibility there. I would also say that I think a lot of the time the Scottish Government will bring in changes at very short notice and will make these grand scenarios. They've announced huge amounts of money, or what seem like huge amounts of money for things like extra staffing. But of course, once you divvy it up per council, it's far less than half a teacher per school. But again, they will say, oh, we're not going to put in every job retention payment for supply teachers for this term because there should be plenty of money to offer for supply teachers. But of course, the money that Scottish Government's put forward is supposed to cover supply teachers, it's PSAs, it's supposed to cover extra cleaning, and it's supposed to cover a host of other things. It's nothing like enough. So again, we're very, very, very trapped by this. And then we're even trapped by things like the Scottish Government will say, face coverings in schools. Edinburgh EIS is saying, the EIS nationally as well is saying that where staff wish to have it, they should be given the option to be using FFP2 masks, respirators, because FFP2 respirators actually offer protection to the wearer. We raised this with Edinburgh. Edinburgh says to us, Scottish Government guidance says it's face coverings. Now, I've just spent far more time than is healthy from anyone reading the references behind the Scottish Government guidance, which actually doesn't say when. It's all about face coverings because they stop transmission. So we are turning around to Edinburgh saying, well, we want this because it offers protection. It is a different thing. But Edinburgh's there saying, here's what the Scottish Government says, we are following their guidance. And it seems to be impossible to get an answer between these two. They play off. So we are left stuck in the middle. So these are some of the things that are extremely frustrating about this, even down to Helen's vaccine rant. There was agreement a while ago that staff who work in special schools, in our special schools, or indeed with children in mainstream schools with special needs, should have access to the vaccine because of the nature of the work. Effectively, it's like health and social care work. That was agreed over a month ago. And again, to give Edinburgh its due, it put forward staff to do this. Implementation, disastrous. But again, it seems to be impossible to get answers. The buck passes and passes and passes. No one actually says, we're trapped because very often people will not say no to us. It's just we don't actually get anyone saying yes, or we don't get it done. So staff are left feeling really, really frustrated. So yes, there we go. I could probably rant for a bit longer. But again, maybe I should end with a positive. To be fair to Edinburgh, they have been one of the better Fridays. They have really supported shielding staff in schools to work from home. They are now saying that all staff over 28 weeks working from home, which is, to be fair to them, considerably better than some other local authorities. So it isn't all negative, and there are positives. It isn't all negative now, and there are certainly positives going forward, but wow, it's been a long and it's a hard fight.
Thanks for sharing those positives and those challenges. Thanks, Alison, for all you're doing. Keep up the good work. Des, would you like to come in? You're still on mute, Des.
Okay, I hope. I just want to say, given the time, that Edinburgh TUC always thinks a bit about lobbying during Scottish Parliament election. You know, the election is only 7 weeks off or something like that, 8 weeks off. Then obviously lobbying in this election will be a bit different, and we know, like hustings meetings or things like that, or so lobbying will be kind of electronic, you know, emails or through arranging Zoom meetings with candidates. So I'm just want to say all this because we'd be interested in saying, the Edinburgh TUC would be interested in saying something to Edinburgh candidates for the election, whether they're SNP, Liberal or Labour or Green, both for the constituency seats and also for the regional list seats as well. And I'm just not saying people should come up with it now, but I think I'd be interested in saying what should Edinburgh TUC say to the candidates in the Edinburgh Lothians about schools, and what should the new Parliament do when it gets elected in May this year, because apparently up to a third of the MSPs are going to change. So I think there's it's a new Parliament in a way, and you know, I've been interested to find out what we should actually be saying about Edinburgh to the new Parliament. That's all. Thank you.
I realize you might not want a full answer, but I can give you a bit of an answer already. The EIS has just launched its sort of manifesto for the Scottish elections. So we do have a set of general asks for all political parties, and I've been emailed a suggested list for campaign ideas for campaigning, which I haven't had a chance to look at yet, but there certainly is on my to-do list for this week. So there are certainly some things within that, and it is very much about proper funding for the recovery. So for example, the closing the gap teams to be kept going for next year, for much better terms and conditions for supply staff. Now obviously, again, we can speak for supply teachers who've really been badly treated through this pandemic, but you know, I think the same would apply for a lot of our supply staff who've effectively been treated like they're 0 hours contract workers. So there are huge amounts of work around there. Again, we are certainly asking all of the political parties to commit to a general move towards smaller class sizes. I mean, a lot of people reminded me that way back in the day, there was an initial move where the Scottish government, the SNP, had actually committed to that, and they started that move, and apparently, and this is like, you know, going back 15 years or more, and it just withered on the vine. So that needs to be reinvigorated. So we have some of those sorts of things. I have to say, on top of that, I think we really need to be pushing both our councillors and our local MSPs around some of these very specific issues, because again, because we are very stuck with things like the vaccine, with things like the face masks, politicians can get answers that we can't. And I've certainly taken to emailing quite a lot of our councillors around this, and one of the things I need to follow up with is, well, I've heard from this party and this party, but I have not heard from these parties, and I will be letting all my, you know, members know who is emailing back and who isn't. So hopefully that might get a bit of traction. So yeah, I think there are both specifics and broader, and I'm more than happy to share the EIS election manifesto with people if people want to do that. And I mean, I have to say, again, a positive, my experience of, say, rep meetings since, you know, we've gone to Teams, is attendance has been through the roof, because there is a flexibility around that you couldn't have in normal times. So maybe we could actually start to get more people coming to hustings. So maybe we do actually try and organise themed hustings around education, around poverty, around certain things, and invite MSPs and MSP candidates to come to those. And maybe that's something we look at over the next couple of weeks and really try and nail them, because I think we could find that we get some, you know, better attendance than we would if we were trying to do it in a, you know, a drafty hall somewhere. So yeah, maybe it is actually an opportunity as well.
Great, thanks, I look forward to that. Ian, you've had your hand up for a while, would you like to come in now?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Very quickly, what Unison did last year when we knew that the schools were going back was we held a webinar where all our members, well, not all of them, but a good amount of members who attended that. And as a result of that, we actually increased our health and safety reps, and we increased our school contact people within, people that were willing to actually take information in and represent all school staff within the health and safety working groups. And I'm really grateful. You know, every day I'm sitting working, I'm complaining about working extortion hours. Well, I'm not complaining, I do it anyway. And I enjoy it because I enjoy it. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, my personal thanks go out to every single one of you who are working on the front line. You know the risks that are involved when you go to work. I'm working from the safety of my own home, and yet my wife and daughter are actually going to work every day. You know, I'd be wrong to say it doesn't worry me, because it does. But what I wanted to do, and I think that's what gives me, I must be the biggest pain in the arse that the executive directors I've got at the moment, because I'm like a dog with a bone. Once I get something in my mind, I'll just go for it. What I wanted to say though was, last year as a result of it, we were getting plenty of information through the Westminster Parliament. We were getting absolutely nothing back from the Scottish Parliament, one of our colleagues that were from the BAME community and that were working in schools and in healthcare. And I ended up having to write to a friend of this committee, Sarah Boyack, MSP, who raised the BAME issue in the Scottish Parliament. And as a result of that, we ended up getting a working group. I've only ever seen one report coming out of that working group though. And it took ages to get agreements for PSAs and for other school staff to either get working from home or to be put into other duties, all because the Scottish Government were not giving out the same advice as the Westminster Government. And the answer that I got from some of the executive directors was appalling, because it was, there are more people in ethnic minorities in England and Wales than there is in Scotland. Well, I'm sorry, COVID doesn't have any borders. So that was one thing that we took up, and you know, we still need a lot of advice coming from the Scottish Government. The issue that Alison brought up with regards to the government guidance, the Scottish Government guidance, as I couldn't tell you how often I've actually written to our senior managers now and said that the Scottish Government guidance should be used as a baseline, a starting point. We know exactly what's going on in each of our departments in the City Council. If we've got a high rate of transmission in schools, then the schools should shut, or the classes should, a blended learning format. That, the answers that we're getting back consistently are, we're following the Scottish Government guidance, and that is it. For Christ's sake, we are we're the capital of Scotland. We should be leading by example. And our city leadership team should actually be putting their foot down and saying, we're using this as a baseline and we know what we're doing, but they're unwilling to do it because they're working from home and they're taking a decision that directly impacts on frontline staff. The other thing that I wanted to say, and it goes back again to what Alison was saying, when we did start, when Swinney turned around and says from 25 to 30%, we're going back to 100%, I was actually involved in the first 3 versions of the SORT document. We're now on 12th or 13th version here. God knows what it's like now. I mean, it must be like War and Peace. But the fact of the matter is, we should only have went back to school if they are absolutely safe. You know, you're doing a great job. I just wanted to say that, so thanks.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's brilliant to hear. Thank you from somebody that knows exactly what's going on in the city. So solidarity to you and your work going forward. Helen, I'm mindful of the time. Do you want to make what? Are you okay? You okay? Okay. Well, I think it's 3 minutes to 8. I'd like to give many thanks to all the speakers on tonight's meeting. I hope you found it informative and interesting. Many thanks to everybody who's contributed to the meeting also. It was brilliant to hear from so many different aspects of the education system. Many thanks to Alison. You can see how hard she's working just looking at her at this meeting. So many thanks from all of us for everything that you're doing. We think you're doing a brilliant job. Next week, before we close, my colleague Sophia was mentioning that our Edinburgh Trade Union Council COVID-19 committee meeting is about higher education and the challenges from the past, present and future for those with disabilities. So if you would like to join us, I'll see if Alison can send out a link to the meeting. But with that, I'd like to close the meeting tonight and wish you all the very best wishes. Good night.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Claire.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Claire. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Claire. Bye.
Bye.